Good afternoon, from Mike here from award-winning John Mike's Virtual Tours of Scotland. Excuse me from stumbling over the gravestone on the way back here, but we're trying to get a nice sunny aspect. We're a bit in the shade just over there. So it's a wonderful day here, great weather again in this part of Scotland. We're in Cramond, and Cramond is just a few miles away from Edinburgh city centre, about 4 miles away, and it's on the coast, and it's a very historic village. The name Cramond goes back thousands of years to a tribe known as the Gododin tribe, and this was before even Scotland, Wales, England were recognised as being separate countries, when it was more like Britain. And this name, Cramond, it really comes from Carn, as in the Welsh in a lot of ways, and connects with Amond because it's at the mouth of the River Amond. So Carn Amond, if you like. It was just a common language that was used by these ancient peoples, so very appropriate to the location of where Cramond is. Now, we're in the graveyard of Cramond Kirk. Now, Cramond, and Joe's going to talk a little bit more about this, has got a very strong Roman connection. The Romans were in Scotland from about, well, in this part of Scotland. They were in other bits a bit earlier, from about 140 AD to about 212 AD. And there was 2 incursions into this particular part where a camp was set up, a Roman camp. Now, the Roman camps were for different reasons put here. There was a big wall called the Antonine Wall, and Joe's going to tell you more about that. And the Antonine Wall finished not very far away from here, and in order to provide support to the coastline, where the Romans would be importing goods and have their connections out of Scotland, they had a camp here, and in the churchyard, in fact, where this very church stands, there would have been a camp, and dating back to about 140 something AD. The emperor who was in place at the time was Septimus Severus, and he was known for a very military outlook. He was born in Libya, and he came over here and took his son with him when they were here in the 200s AD, and he developed this area very much in terms of the camp. And you can see a lot of the earthworks in existence today, but I'll leave that for Joe to cover a little more detail. We've got a nice surprise on our tour today, but I won't tell you too much about that, just about halfway through, just as we change over. So if you look here, the building of the church, and we'll move further over. Now, the church dates to well, there was a religious site here going back to the 600s in the early history of Christianity in Scotland, but there would be numerous buildings, and a lot of them wouldn't really last because they would be made from timber, maybe a bit of clay infill, maybe even a bit of thatching and so on. But as time went on, the building material became more permanent. So in the 15th century, we've got the oldest part of the church, which this is tower here. Now, you can see with the rubble stonework, it's very uneven there. And as we move around the church, it gets a bit more modern. There was various additions made to it in history. But in the 17th century, there was one Oliver Cromwell. You may have heard of him.
Dear Ollie. He always pops up.
Who became Lord Protector. And they had various wars and were able to do away with the monarchy at one point, where Charles I lost his head under the orders of Cromwell. Now, here in Scotland, they were supporting, or some were supporting, Charles II, and he was scouting about for support in Scotland. So Cromwell had to come here to put down any support for that claimant. And he would go looking for the king, trying to get the supporters, but he came here to Cramond Kirk and he took the bell. The bell was taken away because it would be valuable metal and it would be taken to be melted down, and it's one of the few occasions when the bell was brought back. And we don't know why in particular, but General Monk, who was one of Oliver Cromwell's men, made sure that that bell was brought back here and put back, and it's still there today. And this is a very active congregation here at Cramond. Now, Cramond, a little port on the River Armand, as we talked about, it had an industrial history that goes back to about the 18th century, the 1700s into the 1800s, and there was an iron smelter, and there was steel actually produced and shipped out of Cramond as well. So to India, in fact, going into the late 18th century, into the early 19th century. So it's a very sort of active port that went through various transitions. Today, it's a very lazy, picturesque farmer fishing village, and with various accommodations where people come to enjoy. So we'll go a wee bit more, closer to the church. And we can maybe be able to pick out this little detail. We've got an ancient sundial just on the wall here and doing its business today. It's quite a nice sunny day. So this is the oldest part, is this tower here. Now, one of the ministers here at Cramond was the Reverend Walker, Robert Walker. You saw a picture of him skating on Duddingston Loch in his black hat, coat and very beautiful ice skates. Well, he was the minister, or preacher here at Cramond back in the 18th century, or just one of them anyway. Okay, so we'll take a little walk along and tell you about another...
that famous picture, and it still hangs in the National Gallery of the skating minister.
Yeah, it's an amazing portrait by Henry Raeburn, one of our most famous portrait painters. Now, looking at this here, we have got this tombstone. Now, this character is quite an interesting one. He is called James Hope. Now, James Hope, or Sir James Hope, was a lawyer, as many wealthy Scots happen to be, because it was a very fail-safe occupation to go into, and we're talking even back as far as the 17th century. Now, James Hope was a bit of a wild card. We talked about Oliver Cromwell, well, and the support for the young king, Charles II. Well, James Hope supported the ministers who would be against episcopacy. He didn't believe that the Presbyterian religion should be swept away, and he saw Oliver Cromwell, the Cromwellian government, as being favourable to keeping Presbyterianism here in Scotland, and he actually defended legally some ministers who were under a lot of threat because they were against episcopacy. So that was James Hope, but he came from Granton, and Granton is around the coast here, not very far away, and he did the right thing. He married a very wealthy lady called Anne Fowlis, and she happened to be heir to lead workings, lead mines in what was called Lead Hills. And lead was a very sought after material, so he began to accumulate wealth, and he brought into fashion the name Hopeton, which we were very familiar with today because we've got the Earls of Hopeton and Hopeton House. It isn't very far away from here, and that's the same family. So he is one of the early Hopes, because that is their name as such. Now, his wife died, and then he proceeded to marry somebody else who had a lot of money as well, and started to gradually accrue more and more wealth. But he finally met his end because he went over to the Low Countries in Europe, and he caught an illness. And that illness, I think, we think anyway, had something to do with the lead workings, because he was going over there also and talking about that material and being involved with that material. That was his business. So James Hope, one of the big names that is actually interred here in the churchyard.
And it's very difficult to read because it's in very old type English as well.
It's quite a stunning stone that stands out.
And lead is still well sought after. There's some criminals who still go onto the roofs of the churches to steal the lead from the churches here as well. So
Yeah.
still criminals still do that. Yeah.
It's a shame we can't get in the church because it's got the most beautiful woodwork in there and furnishings. And there are wonderful stained glass windows. There's a stained glass window to St Cuthbert, to St Columba, and to St Margaret, of course, and other saints as well. But there is also a commemorative mosaic, which was designed by Douglas Strachan, who's probably better known as a stained glass designer. And that connects with a story of one Jock Howison. Now, some people say this is a legend, could be a legend, but I've been around the graveyard here and I've seen a stone with the name Howison on it. Now, in the 16th century...
1707, this goes back to here.
Yeah, you see the actual crossbones and the skull. Well, this is all to do with make the most of life. Enjoy the good things in life, although some people may look at that and think, oh, that's really horrific, that's really gothic, that's not nice to look at. But it is reminding us of the sands of time, as they go through this little timer here.
Memento Mori.
Memento Mori. So talking about Jock Howison, and there's a mosaic to him here, we had King James V, who was the father of Mary Queen of Scots. And he used to go out into normal life. He went incognito, but we're going back to the days before newspapers, before television, before photography, so not many people knew what the king looked like. And he would be out listening to what the common people were thinking, and he was called the Old Man of Ballingeich. And if you think back to what Joe was talking about on our Stirling tour, he did mention there was an exit from the back and a road that behind Stirling Castle that James V used to take, and he would dress down. Well, on one occasion we had Jock Howison, who was a very poor peasant, who would maybe have a bit of farmland but very, very poor. And one day, beside Cramond Brig, he happened to be seeing this man walking alone, and this man was attacked by a gang of robbers. And I don't know what Jock Howison was able to do, but he did get in there and stop the attack and saved the man. And the man said to him, "Thank you so much for that." And it was, believe it or not, it was King James V that he had actually saved. And as a reward to Jock Howison, James V gave lands to the Howison family. There's another wee addition to the story where he said, invited Jock to Holyrood Palace before disclosing his identity, and said, "Come to a levee, come to a big gathering of nobles at Holyrood Palace, and I'll see you there." And he says, "Oh, but how would I know who you were with so many people there?" And he says, "Well," he says, "I am the only one that would be wearing a hat." So Jock Howison went along and to this gathering, and all these people, he was a bit intimidated by all these wealthy, rich nobles, until they said, "God save the king." And this chap came through the doorway and everybody bowed, and the only person whose head was above all the public was the chap who Jock had rescued. So there's another little tale.
And he was wearing a hat.
He was wearing a hat as well.
He was wearing a crown.
So we're taking a little wander around outside. Look at the
Just look at
beautiful
the
colours
here. Stunning here. Absolutely stunning. And the roses, I wish this was an odorama because you can smell the roses from here.
One of the things that's unusual about this church is that it was added to in the 17th and 18th century by two leading architects in Edinburgh, and you would think for a small, humble church that was very unusual, and so it was. We actually had David Bryce and William Byrne, who were both very active in conserving and making this a beautiful church it is. Another story, well, this is a true story I'm going to tell, and it's about Queen Victoria made a visit here, very briefly, because there's what we call the Laird's Loft, where the rich landowners would stay. And Queen Victoria came, and she went into the Laird's Loft, and to this very day there's a little chair which is covered, and that is the very chair that Queen Victoria sat on. So she visited the beautiful Cramond Church herself.
And it also survived the Reformation, because it was Catholic before, and it's one of the few in Scotland that did manage to survive the Reformation.
It had a lot of tender, loving care, and we can see, you know, here is the mausoleum, as we call it, to an important family who were called the Ingalls Family, and it's all secured because we talked about body stealers, and going back to the times of Buck and Hare in the 19th century, so families had to be very careful. There would be little guard houses positioned in the cemeteries, but also the most important people would be able to get a mausoleum, and it would be sealed off just to make extra sure. Okay, so we're going to walk carefully through
I'm loving
the
this
gate.
buddleia here. Look at the flowers just dripping on that buddleia. The butterfly bush, absolutely gorgeous. Of course, this is the area where J.K. Rowling's now lives. And as I was driving there, the road outside her house was completely blocked off. And as I was driving past it, I realised what it was. She was having her bush trimmed.
Oh, right,
She had
okay.
she's got she's got the biggest trees in the neighbourhood.
Yeah,
These
yeah.
Landi, and I think legally she has to get them trimmed every now and again. So they've closed off the roads so that J.K. Rowling can get her hedges done.
Well, Landi it's quite a notorious tree. It's like a wall, isn't it, of
Yeah,
greenery?
Landi. Oh,
But it's amazing for privacy, of course, and
Yeah.
that's very suitable for the likes of J.K. Rowling.
so
So we're
just do a
coming
little
through.
scan around here, so you can see that we're just walking out of the cemetery, and there's the back of the kirk. There we go.
Beautiful little church, Crammond. And another wee story is about Robert Lee Stevenson, because he used to come down here quite a lot, and there's what we call Cramond Tower, and it's said that perhaps that was his model for the House of the Shaws in Kidnapped. And there was a walk, a very public walk, because he wrote about this walk, accompanied by his dad, and that was the time he had to tell his father that he was not going to be an engineer, and he was going to give up his engineering course, and he was going to be a writer. So you just think how horrific that was. Because
And he doubled down on it because he was he's told he was an atheist as well.
and he said it was the worst walk in history with his father having to give him that news. But they ended up Crammond Inn, and there used to be where Robert Lee Stevenson had carved his name on the table at the Crammond Inn, but it's no longer there, unfortunately. But he loved this place, and he was going to write a book, a novel based on Crammond. It never actually happened. Anyway,
Now-
we're coming to our special
Lisa's surprise.
moment.
Yeah.
So we're just going to swing around.
So we were walking through the gardens earlier, and we came across this little singing group. And I got speaking to them, and I asked if it would be okay if we filmed them, and they said yeah. And so they're going to give us a couple of wee Scottish songs, and then I'm going to interview one of them. So this is totally impromptu in terms of, like, we just arrived here, and I'm going to hand over to Mike.
The He's a stranger to me, I and say let him be, for I care no more for him than the waves o' the sea. Oh, but he is the son o' a high lord and king, and I am but the daughter o' a poor working man. Say let him drink his wine, I and I'll drink my tea, for I care no more for him than the waves o' the sea. Oh, the sands o' the shore and the waves o' the sea, when his back is turned, he's a stranger to me. He's a stranger to me, I and say let him be, for I care no more for him than the waves o' the sea.
That's excellent, ladies. Thank you very much indeed. So I was just explaining that. I was just walking through the fort here. I'm going to talk a wee bit more about the Roman fort, and then just came across this group of ladies singing. You're all from the Cramond area, I'm assuming? Yeah? And I asked if we could film them, and they said yes. And I've also asked if we could maybe do a wee interview as impromptu. This is not rehearsed.
I just wanted to feed you a comment. We'll get loads of comments about how beautiful your singing is. The last comment is, what lovely singing in a lovely environment. I've just got to feed you that.
So we asked for a spokesperson, and Muriel got volunteered. So the last person to step back was Muriel. So just want to step out a wee bit, Muriel. So can I ask you a couple of questions about, because I just came across you here and you're all singing. It was absolutely gorgeous. Can you tell us how long you've been together as a singing group?
6 years. 6 years. Yes.
6 years.
Yeah, there's the Cramond Community Choir, but we are separate from that. We're the Singing for Fun group, and we meet on a Thursday afternoon in the Cramond Kirk Hall here.
Okay.
And we have a lot of fun, we really do. And choose our songs, and most of us maybe choose a song that we like, and the repertoire has grown over the years, and we just have fun. We're a fun crowd.
And how long have you been singing together then? How long has the group been going?
6 years like this, yes. But recently, of course, like everybody else, we've been on Zoom.
Uh-huh.
You know, so this is about the first time so many of us have been able to get together and to be able to sing outdoors, which has been wonderful. It was a sad beginning because one of our group, she died very recently. So this was really what got us together today, was to come and sing here as the cortege was leaving for the crematorium. So we're very happy we were able to do that for one of our much loved singers.
So it's a celebration of her life rather than, and a commemoration as well, I guess, yeah? And it's just coincidental that we were here and you were singing, because it sounded absolutely gorgeous when it was coming up there. Now, I understand you're going to give us another song?
Yes.
And what was the song going to be?
The Eriskay Love Lilt.
The Eriskay Love Lilt. So Eriskay is an island?
I think we've got people asking what the song you were singing was called. The one
The
that,
Sands o' the Shore.
Thank you.
Yes.
The Sands o' the Shore.
Sands o' the
So you sing Scottish songs, but you also sing a big repertoire, yeah? So it's not just Scottish songs, it's any songs in the English language.
We've got some
We do
American
some
ones.
African songs.
African as well. Any French?
Plaisir d'amour.
Plaisir d'amour? Je ne regrette rien?
No. We haven't got that one. We've got Plaisir d'amour. We sing that one as well.
Okay, well you choose which song you're going to sing, and as I say, we've got people from West Virginia, from California, from British Columbia, from different parts of Canada, United States, Argentina. We've got Italy. We've got somebody from Cramond who might be coming along here. So we've got a local. So you might get somebody joining you. Quite soon. I think we've got some people in France and in Germany.
Yeah.
And Italy. So we've got all the major, and Japan. We get some viewers in Japan as well. So. And a lot of people down in England and Ireland as well. So you're being broadcast live here, ladies.
Thank you.
No pressure.
Thank you.
Sad am I without thee. When I'm lonely, dear white hart, black the night or wild the sea, my foot finds the old pathway to thee. There me o'er of an o, there me o'er of an e, there me o'er o, sad am I without thee. Thou'rt the music of my heart, harp of joy, O Crammond me, moon of guidance by night, strength and light thou to me. Bear me o'er of an o, bear me o'er of an e, bear me o'er o, sad am I without thee.
You're going to pick this one up? This is going to be a nice jaunty Gaelic song, yeah? A nice jaunty Gaelic. Porridge, okay.
Rockin' long, talalong, rockin' on the Sue. Rockin' long, talalong, rockin' on the Sue. Rockin' long, talalong, rockin' on the Sue. Rockin' long, shitana, long, she rockin' on the Sue. Rockin' tala, 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 rockin' on the Sue. Rockin' tala, 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 rockin' on the Sue. Rockin' tala, 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 rockin' on the Sue. Rockin' long, shitana, long, she rockin' on the Sue.
Well done. Well done, ladies. Take a bow.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You can pick this up on Joe and Mike's virtual tours, or Joe and Mike's award-winning virtual tours if you're on any of the social media. So it's it'll be double award-winning now. Okay. So well done. Thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And
Thank
this was impromptu. So again, thank you from us, and thank you from our viewers to you as well. So thank you very much indeed.
Made a joyous end to a sad beginning this afternoon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now go home and get your porridge. So let's move along a bit. We're going to pick up on the Roman history, as Mike suggested before. Cramond is long associated with the Roman history. So the establishments here come back thousands of years, even before the Romans were established. Mike mentioned the Gododin, the tribes that were here. The Romans called them the Votadini. They gave them their own name. And there's so much Roman history. Now, people generally think that the Roman frontier stopped at Hadrian's Wall, which is just across the border, which goes from Carlisle across to Newcastle, more or less. So just across the modern Scottish border. But that's not quite true. The Romans were actually in the UK, the landmass, let's call it just Britain, were in Britain for about 400 years. And the first invasion came in the middle of the 1st century. Now I'm going to talk about the emperor who came after Hadrian. So we had Hadrian's Wall. Now it was thought that Hadrian's Wall was built to keep the marauding Scots, they weren't called Scots then, but the marauding tribes out of, to protect people down south. But that's not quite true, because a lot of trading went on. But after Hadrian came Antoninus Pius. Antoninus Pius became the emperor in it was 138, he became the emperor of Rome. He was 51 years old or 52 years old, so he was quite old in Roman terms to become the emperor. And it was him who had decided to move the frontier further north. So it was under Antoninus, we could just call him Antonine, who moved the whole frontier up to this area here. And he wanted the wall built from the south of the River Forth right across the middle of Scotland to the north of the River Clyde. Now, if you look at the geography of Scotland, this is the narrowest part. If you think of Scotland, think of the waste of Scotland where it's cinched at the waist. Well, that's the narrowest part through the central Scotland. And this wall was built. It's about 60 kilometres long. And it was different in structure from the Hadrian's Wall because it's actually made of turf. So it was made of organic material. So a lot of it has rotted over the time. But the foundations were made out of stone. You can still visit the wall, you can still see the outline of the wall, because in front of it they built a trench. On the north side of the wall they built a trench, and they also built a mound. So again, when the tribes were coming down to attack, They'd be seen coming over the hump, or the heap that they had built, and also there was a trough that they had to get before they could attack the Roman wall itself. Along the wall, there are interspersed at equidistance, about 3.5 kilometres, there were forts built all the way across the country. And between the forts, there were fortlets. Now, some historians think that the forts, the big forts, were designed to accommodate cavalry with the horses, and the small forts were just there to accommodate the military themselves. That's a lot of it's still open to conjecture, but that seems to fit the bill. I mean, if you're going to keep your cavalry there rather than your infantry, you're going to have a place for your horses. And there was 3 legions who were involved in building the wall, and we know this because what is unique to the Antonines Wall is that these legions, it was the 2nd Legion, the 6th Legion, and the 20th Legion, made distance slabs. These distance slabs were very creative, they were very ornate, they were carved in sandstone, and they were put up along the wall, and the legions would show off. So they'd be saying to the other legions, look what we did, we completed this 4 weeks before the other legions. So they're actually showing off, and they were going bah, boo, sucks to the other legions who were building it. So there's a lot of graffiti on these stones as well. Now, 19 of these stones that are in, I believe in the I think there's 19 of them in the Huntery Museum in Glasgow. So the largest collection is in Glasgow, and the Huntery Museum in Glasgow, I think, is one of the most underrated museums in the whole of Great Britain. It's absolutely amazing. We have one of the main stones from the East Coast in the National Museum of Scotland. And I've got a wee picture of these stones. And each stone tells a story, and they're so well preserved. And this is how we know which legions were involved. And I've got a picture here of the one that we have that was discovered here on the East Coast. Legion 2. Legion 2. So we know that Legion 2 built this. And on one side, you've got the warrior Romans subjugating the locals here, and on the other side they're a bit more patrician, so they've got a bit more bucolic scene where they're more patrician to the locals, and they've got sheep and goats, etc. So each stone told a story. I just want to show you, I've got another one here. This is it in a bit more detail. This is the more patrician side of that stone. You can see the outline of sheep, and they're giving alms to the locals here. And this one, they're crushing the locals. They've got the locals naked, being crushed under the cavalry of the Roman cavalry there. And one more. I need to see these. This is from another legion. This, I believe, is from Legion 6, and this is one of their stones. If you're really interested in them, that is absolutely amazing. And why did they build the wall? This is the big question that historians have been looking at as well. Why would they need a wall? They already had Hadrian's Wall. Well, I mentioned that Antonine became emperor and he was 51 years old. Now, he wasn't a great military strategist. Coming after Hadrian, who was a great military strategist, Antonine really had to show something to his people back home. So he became emperor in 38. In 142, the actual wall was built. So it was actually built in super speed time right across the country. 60 kilometres of a 3-metre high wall was built by hand in such a small number of years. And this was good propaganda for him back home, saying, look, I've moved the frontier. So this area here became the northern west frontier of the Roman Empire, and it played a big role in it here. Now, we've got the remains here of the Roman camp. What I'm walking through here at the moment are the barracks. So these have all been excavated. And you can see here the Roman barracks. Over here, separate from the barracks, we have the latrines. Latrines are separate. Now, the Romans taught the locals here a lot about hygiene and health. They kept the latrines separate from where they were living, and obviously away from the grain stores. They had bathhouses, so they kept themselves clean. Now, but however, the latrines have been really, really useful for the paleobotanists here in Scotland who've been researching and helping with the archaeological digs here. And the paleontologists or the paleobotanists were able to discover that from what was left over, from the leftover of the Roman centurions and the Roman soldiers what they were actually eating. And it saw that they were actually eating local food, local grains, local roots, but they're also having more exotic fruits and foods being brought over. So obviously they had a good supply chain, and Cramond was one of the main ports for their supply chain. But one of the side discoveries that they found out, they found lots of eggs and lots of worm eggs, so they figured that the Romans were full of intestinal worms. So they kept themselves clean on the outside, but they had a few problems on the inside as well. Now, going back to the forts and the fortlets and the reason for the wall, another reason that people have put forward, again it's conjecture for the wall, was a customs site. Because there were certainly gates within these and ports or doors within these forts and fortlets to allow transfer of goods as well. So it is known that they traded with the locals on the north, but they certainly traded with the locals on this side of the wall, because we have discovered silver hoards, and in the silver hoards that were found, it was seen that they were taking silver plate. Look at taking a big silver plate, and they were cutting slices out of it, just like a pizza almost, and trading with the locals. And the locals loved shiny things, and so the local chiefs were certainly trading with the Romans and collaborate. I mean, they were here for 400 years. You're going to collaborate quite a bit with your, with the dominant tribes, who are being dominated by the Romans. It's also thought that the wall was built because the tribes on the north were not too friendly with the tribes who were collaborating in the south. But it's all conjecture as to why. Why did they build it? And we can go that, we can look at it in modern terms. There's, walls don't work. Walls always fall down. So don't build walls. That's the story we get from the Romans. And I always love it with Monty Python. Remember Monty Python when he said, well, what did the Romans give us? Well, they gave us straight roads. Yeah, but apart from that, what did they give us? Well, they gave us an alphabet. Yeah, but apart from that, what did they give us? Well, they gave us central heating. Yeah, well, apart from that, well, they gave us the basis of law. Yeah, but apart from that, there's all this thing about, what did the Romans? The Romans had a big impact on the whole of this island that we're living on in terms of Britain. And I'm always amazed that when the Romans left, so they were here for about 400 years, and when the Romans left, we went into the Dark Ages. We kind of lost the skills of central heating. There were people I grew up in a house in the 1960s and 70s that didn't have central heating. The Romans had it thousands of years ago. How about that? I always have these images of the tribes over the wall up to the north living in basic accommodation, living in round houses, all smoky, and living and smoking their meat and smoking their fish and living off the basic land, freezing to death, wearing pelts of the local animals. And here the Romans drinking wine, they've got lamps, they're having parties, they're visiting the vomitorium because they've eaten too much. Why would you not want to cross over that wall? I would be climbing over that wall to get with the Romans. I was like the Berlin Wall. I would want to be in the west, not in the east.
Building techniques, Joe, as well, because they were building rectangular accommodations as well, which was quite innovative when you were having the round houses and what might be said as more primitive that the local tribes were staying in. Then they might have had a bit of a civilizing influence in terms of them, after the Romans had gone, the local tribes coming back and utilising some of what the remains of what the Romans had left and moving forward in a way as well, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And they had leather shoes. That's another thing, The amount of artefacts that have been discovered here, and they just didn't stay here. And again, this is another misapprehension about the Romans. The Romans actually did go all the way up the east coast of Scotland. They did go right up past Aberdeen, right up to the Moray Firth. There have been archaeological digs up there. They found Roman coins and Roman artefacts all the way up. There are forts that have been discovered all the way up, and there have been archaeological digs. And one of the big things that they did find, because the Romans, when they left and they came back, so there were different waves of Roman occupation here. And one of the waves when they left, because they always thought they were going to come back, so they hid all the silver, and cached it and put it into mountainsides or hillsides. But one of the things they also did was they put all this leather shoes they had, and they were all put down a well, and this well was discovered. And in the well, they found all these shoes. There were men's shoes, ladies' shoes, and children's shoes. And that kind of uncovered something, because Roman soldiers were not allowed to marry, and unless they had permission, but they were certainly not allowed to marry. But next to these larger forts, there were villages there, and in the villages they actually discovered that there were intermarriages going on with the locals here as well. Why not? And also, you mentioned that Severin came from Libya. So the Romans who were here were not just coming from Italy, they were coming from all over the Roman Empire. And so you can imagine these poor souls who pulled the short straw back in 140 AD and said, guess where you're going? You're going to be building a wall in Scotland in wintertime. What a great job that would be. And you've been pulled out of your tropical Mediterranean grapes, abundant, eating pomegranates, and you're coming up here scraping around for hazelnuts, fighting with the squirrels for hazelnuts. I was just like, in those days, it would have been a real short straw to carry. But the Romans who were here were from all the different mix. They were multinational, they were from different regions, and they were all brought here. And we have the records of some of the Romans who were here. There are letters that have been discovered, tablets, not letters as such, but tablets that have been found, and again on exhibit at the Huntery Museum.
One thing I found interesting, Joe, was that when people look at the Antonine Wall and they think about Hadrian's Wall, and we were taught this at school as young children, it was about keeping out these nasty Picts, these Caledonians, these people that lived up in the north. But I think recent research has probably calmed down that idea a bit and said, well, this was the extent of the province of what the Romans wanted to do. It was the limits of the Roman Empire, the northwestern boundary of it, and it was more to contain maybe what was going on and their economy, and that was just a demarcation of the boundary, which is a much more sort of peaceful kind of philosophy in a lot of ways.
And it was the Romans who named the Picts, because they called them the Picti, the painted people.
Yeah.
So they gave them the name. And there's a lot of questions of where they came in waves. So they were up here. So Antonine's Wall was built. They lived up here for about 40 years, and then they retreated back down to Hadrian's Wall. What went on? Why did they retreat? Some historians are saying, well, it could have been because of plague back in Europe. So they weren't getting supplies coming in. They couldn't keep the supply chain going. Other people would say, well, there was trouble with the other frontiers in Europe, and so they had to take troops away from here northwest, which was reasonably peaceful because they were here for 400 years, to fight on other fronts to maintain it. And then they came back again, so there were different waves of Roman invasion here and the Roman culture being brought over here. Fascinating. I'm fascinated by the Romans, how they lived here. And then just in modern times here, so we've mentioned a lot about archaeology, but one of the great finds they had in the 1990s, there used to be a little ferry, because we're going to go down to the village in a minute, but one of the ferrymen was dragging his boat across low tide, and I think it was his anchor got caught in something and he couldn't get the anchor loose, and so they went into to dive in, with divers to go in and find out what was caught on, and there was this amazing find, and it was the Crammond Lioness. And again, I've got another wee picture here of it, and this is, they thought this was going to be a gift to one of the major commanders here. So there's a lioness, and this was found at the mouth of the River Almond. We're going to get into the village in a second, and this was taken up, and it's now again on exhibition. It's huge, and it's on exhibition up at the National Museum of Scotland. So that's the side view. If I maybe can make out from the front, it's a lioness, and the lioness is having lunch with a human character. So the lioness from the front, you actually see that she is devouring a human character. So make of that what you wish. Again, basically conjecture, but is this to do with throwing Christians to the lions, or?
They say too that that it's a symbol of death, because it was the lioness was a symbol of death, devouring the human being, and the snakes there at the base, which they say is all to do about salvation, a symbol of salvation of the spirit. They think that this was for some high-ranking Roman officer's tomb. And when the Romans left, and that was prompted by the death of Septimus Severus. They threw it in the harbour, threw it in the water. Or another thing was that the later tribes, once the Romans had gone, didn't want any remnants of that occupying force. So it was a political move to actually get rid of it.
So like destroying the temples and
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, the history books are still open, and a lot of this. When I was doing I did a bit of research when we were doing our university course on the Antonines Wall, and I'm totally amazed by it. And it's now part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, so you can still walk. Because right along the southern end of the wall, although you can't see anything of the wall because, well, you can see bits of the wall, but a lot of it was made out of turf, so it's degraded by, it's made of organic material. But on the southern side, there was a walkway to allow the easy transport of the troops going along the south side as well, so they could get across, from fort to fort to fort, so they could defend it. And along the wall nowadays, I'm talking the 21st century, they've got various sculptures, and one of the latest sculptures to open up, I just got away from the chorus there.
Oh, yes.
One of the latest sculptures which has just been opened up is this. And this is one of the forts. And this is near the Falkirk Wheel we've visited before. So this is near the Falkirk Wheel. This huge head of a Roman centurion.
We've yet to cover the Falkirk Wheel. We're going to be doing that on a webinar, just in case people are going back into our past videos looking for it. Yeah,
we have filmed it. We haven't released it yet.
We'll get to it. Yeah.
But this is near Falkirk.
Yeah.
So that's kind of ends the story here. We're going to walk into the village.
Popular residential community, Cramond, and again property prices have never been so high. Unusual too in that the flight path of Edinburgh Airport goes directly over Cramond, but it doesn't put anybody off living here. And once we move a bit further into the village, you'll see why that is.
Before we leave the Roman fort here, Mike, I just want to say that when the archaeologists do a dig, they always backfill it. So it's open for further digging, for further research as well. So what you see is the ruins, but they can go back, and so good archaeologists will always backfill the sites that they dig in.
Yeah, there's always new things to be found as well, a new analysis of what they find too. It's very historic. It's a listed community. The buildings are very ancient, and one of them, significantly, the Cramond Inn, which goes back to the 18th century, and it has changed hands many times. A very popular watering hole. It would also be a coach stop where people would change horses and continue their journey. Remember, we were talking about the White Horse Inn when we were doing our Canongate walk as well. So this ancient community, it was a very strategic part, Cramond, of the landscape, and it had all going for itself. It had this River Amond opening out into the larger stretch of water known as the Firth of Forth, which we will see shortly.
And it is the estuary, so it is the Firth, Firth being the Scottish word for estuary.
Beginning to feel.
So it is very tidal.
Yeah, beginning to feel that nice air, as you get closer to the sea. And we're going to step over to the side here. You can see we've got this. It's a conservation area, Cramond Village, and it's part of Edinburgh, but it still retains its own special individual identity. And looking over, picture perfect. We have the post box here. I think we're going to go down the steps, but you can see the telephone box here, and you have also got the Cramond Inn, ancient 18th century, and it's in a transition just now. I think it's changing ownership because it's been closed for so long that they're looking at a refurb. I think a bit of a refurb.
Very popular even for the locals in winter time to come down. I love these stairs down here.
You've got the potted plants as well, and we've had a really good harvest. We've got 2 cherry trees back at the house, and because of the weather, and we've had a fair bit of rain as well as sun, they've come through hugely. We've had a huge harvest of cherries, but you can see
Maybe
all
we
these
turn
different
around here.
blooms here. I love the whiteness of the buildings as well.
That harks back to being an old fishing village.
That's right, absolutely.
So the
yeah.
fishing fleet could see when they're coming into port. But it's obviously a very popular place for sailors to keep
Yeah.
their boats.
There's many stories too about the people who lived in Cramond, and I don't want
What's
any
a
of the locals to pick this up.
Smuggler's Cove.
Yeah, well, also the sinners of Cramond.
Sinners. We love a good sinner.
In fact, there's a book about it, because there are collected by Cramond Kirk session records various instances of unsavoury incidents, we would like to see, when the community has not really cared too much about what the Kirk thought, or what Christianity or religion thought. And we're talking about morals as well. So look out for that one, The Sinners of Cramond.
Sinners of Crammond.
It's a book. And as you can see here, we've get a lot of cyclists coming down here. It's very popular because it's on a beautiful cycleway, and you can cycle all the way from, say, way over as far as New Haven, all the way along Silverknowes, along the coast, beautiful views over to the Kingdom of Fife, and this is a stopping point on your way. You can keep cycling, you can cycle right down over Cramond Brig. Remember Jock Houston, the story about him, and onwards to South Queensferry.
And you can
over
see that the
bridge.
tide is out now as well, so
Yeah.
we'll walk along.
I tell you, we'll walk down this way, Joe. This is where you were. We were talking about the Lioness, and this
Lioness
is where
itself,
they
yeah.
found it.
They thought, oh, she's just
See
like
maltings,
going
because
for
we
a
would have
ride.
breweries as well at some point, industrial buildings. I remember talking about the iron workings and the steel furnaces back in the 18th century, 19th. But this is a great story. I love this story because in the living memory, in 1997, as Joe was saying, there was a ferryman crossing over here with his boat, and he looked down into the water and saw this thing sticking out, and this big bit of stone, sandstone, yellow sandstone, and hey, it was the Crammond Lioness. And it is an exhibit today in the National Museum of Scotland in all its glory. And something that old, you know, why was it in the water? Well, we can only speculate, really.
You know, I sometimes think that it was being uplifted from a boat, and it was being carried over as a gift all the way from Rome, and some silly stevedore here dropped the rope.
Yeah,
I wonder if he paid with his life as well, but, you know.
as to do,
So-
yeah.
Yeah, so again, a lot of conjecture as to why it ended up in the water. Well, if we take it out, walk down this way, for those aficionados who know Muriel Spark and know the Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, Cramond features quite a lot. The story was that she was splitting her love between the art teacher, Mr. Lloyd, and the music teacher, Mr. Lowther. And Mr. Lowther was a man of the Kirk. Indeed, it's reported that he played organ at Cramond Kirk. He was a great musician. And he was an elder of the Kirk, according to Muriel Spark, the story. However, he fell in love. He was beguiled by Jean Brodie, played by the fabulous Maggie Smith. If you have not seen, I keep on pushing this, if you have not seen this movie, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, with Oscar winner Maggie Smith, get it out. It is absolutely brilliant. And it gives a good insight into Edinburgh in the 1930s as well. So she comes down here, and she will bring her Brodie set down to Cramond. And Cramond House is just round this back of those trees there. When we get to the ice cream van, you might be able to see Cramond House. And this is where she spends the night, at Cramond House. She, a single woman, Mr. Lowther, a single man. He's in love with her. He wants to marry her. He does not want to be his lover. He wants to marry her. He wants to marry her and take her over to the Isle of Egg and Rum, where his father got married. And he's very, very staid in his ways. He's very Presbyterian. Whereas the other lover is more creative. The other lover was a Catholic. He was having an illicit affair with Maggie Smith. And Maggie Smith is down here with the children, and they're all going around the castle here down in Cramond. And the kids start talking about what Mr. Lowther and Maggie Smith got up to. And one of the great things is where they're mimicking Maggie Smith's character, Miss Jean Brodie. They say, "Oh, Miss Brodie, I would love..." So Miss Brodie is speaking to Mr. Lowther. And you say, "Oh, Mr. Lowther, I would like to congratulate you on your sexual intercourse." And so the kids are taking the mickey and they're writing these love letters, fake love letters, between Mr. Lowther and Jean Brodie. And of course these letters get hidden and they get discovered later on, and they're used as evidence against her. And this is where they try to get her, use that evidence to try and get Jean Brodie out of the school, out of Marcia Blaine. And this scene where you have Maggie Smith playing the character Jean Brodie against Miss Mackay, who's the headmaster. This scene is is breathtaking, and I really recommend it. And just over here in the distance, Mike maybe will pick it out, you can see Cramond House in the distance. And this is reportedly the house. Watch it, get it out, whatever medium you use to watch this movie, take it out. It is absolutely brilliant. And you will see in it, now that you've been watching us, you will see different parts of Edinburgh, and you will recognise parts of Edinburgh that we've been into as well. And I highly recommend it. So, on a note, I could not leave coming down to Cramond without talking about the prime of Miss Jean Brodie and Muriel Spark and Maggie Smith. So, on that note,